No spin, no bias, no censorship. I'm Dan Wootton. This is Outspoken Live, episode number 45. It was only a matter of time after realising that cracking down on free speech and jailing its supporters for tweets and Facebook posts, Labour is now turning its attention to destroying Reform UK in other ways. It's all part of the plot to stop Nigel Farage becoming Prime Minister in 2029. And is it any wonder they're terrified of a people's revolt when the brutal murder of the young British Army lad Thomas Roberts by an illegal migrant who had killed before and should never have been in the country is dismissed as not even being worth investigating by those in power? In my digest next, I speak up for the family of Tommy and reveal my outrage that his murder has been forgotten by the corrupt MSM, because we must never forget the name Tommy Roberts. Then my special guest today, Gyngell, editor of The Conservative Woman, weighs in. Also coming up on the show, did Two Tier Keir Starmer break the same so-called misinformation law that he's jailing housewives for?
That Keir Starmer himself is guilty of a criminal offence under the Online Safety Act, the criminal offence that he's urging the authorities to prosecute people for. He knowingly trafficked in false information, which definitely caused physical harm.
And how on earth did Angela Rayner manage to turn the coverage of her Ibiza holiday into an issue of sex, class and identity politics, especially by the way she criticised Boris Johnson for going on holiday?
Yes, I'm working class. I like a dance. I like dance music. I got criticised for going to the opera, if you remember. I wasn't allowed. I was a champagne socialist for going to the theatre.
I think it's harder being a woman in politics than a man.
I think we get judged.
Then, in the uncancelled after show today, royal YouTube sensation Plead on the latest news out of Montecito that Prince Harry is, wait for it, demanding an apology from his brother Prince William before he returns to royal duties. I think he's going to be waiting for a very long time on that one, but you can register to watch with Plead on our website right now, www.outspoken.live. Remember, it is a safe space. We're free of censorship. They're free of the big tech control. Your support is only £5 a month, about the price of a cup of coffee, disturbingly these days, and it gives you 30 minutes of extra content every single weekday. Let's go. Do you remember the name Thomas Roberts? Maybe not. But hopefully when I remind you that he was the 21-year-old aspiring Royal Marine stabbed to death by an illegal immigrant who was already a murderer and should never have been in the country, your memory may be sparked just a little. I don't blame you, by the way, if it's not, because the MSM has barely covered this barbaric case because it doesn't fit their narrative that those of us who want to stop illegal immigration at all costs might actually have a point. But this case left an indelible impression on me, and I had the great privilege of meeting Tommy's stepdad. That's how he, Peter Wallace, refers to him.
Reliving it all, it breaks our heart because it's taken away not just our life. Some people say that it's left a hole in your life. It's more like a chasm. It's more like the whole world is falling apart because Tommy's gone.
Now, Tommy was an engineer, engaged to a lovely young woman, and he had the whole world at his feet. He was killed by Loangeen Abdul Ramzi on March the 12th, 2022. A man who should never have been in this country. Abdul Ramzi lied after arriving illegally on a lorry, telling Border Force officers he was 14 when he was actually 19 at least. He also claimed to be fleeing the Taliban and was unfathomably put into a secondary school with young teenagers in Bournemouth. No age assessment was carried out, even though he was known to have links to Norway and Italy, which could have revealed his real age. When he was expelled, for carrying a knife, something that was reported to the police multiple times, he was simply moved to another high school with more British teenagers. Abdul Ramzi, who is now in jail, was a cold-blooded murderer. Before he arrived illegally in the UK, he had shot 2 fellow migrants dead in Serbia. He had been flagged as susceptible to terrorism by the Home Office's own Prevent Anti-Terror Task Group in 2021. He even posted his murder weapons on social media. He wasn't hiding this. He assaulted multiple pupils. He assaulted his foster mother. They all complained to the police and the authorities. Still, nothing was done. And yesterday, in a development that quite simply disgusts me, Rachel Griffin, the senior coroner for Dorset, decided to spare the Home Office into undergoing a full inquest into the circumstances surrounding Tommy's death. That is what his family want more than anything. She claimed there was no systemic failure in the circumstances that allowed this Afghan terrorist into a British high school, only to murder an innocent 21-year-old Brit on a fun night out in Bournemouth. It was only after the murder that Abdul Ramzi's fingerprints were shared with Interpol, revealing his connection to the Serbian double murder. Tommy's family is rightly disgusted by the fact there will be no proper scrutiny of Border Force and the Home Office. They had pinned their hopes on this inquest. That's hardly a surprise. Their lives have been ruined.
He'd been caught with a knife and she'd taken it away from him, but nothing was done. And because of that, our son died.
And that has had a devastating impact on your life, hasn't it, Peter? You'll never be able to get over it, I imagine.
Of course he won't. But we take the risk of this happening again and again and again. So I want you to hear from Peter, Tommy's stepdad, who raised him, about his view of what happened.
Year-old from Afghanistan, and he was put into a school and into a foster home.
It's unbelievable, even to us at the time, before we knew his outcome and his previous convictions. He was obviously more than 14.
This was an adult. This was a full-blown criminal.
Yes, he was.
And a killer.
And a killer.
In one of our schools, allowed to roam free around Bournemouth.
He was in one where he was thrown out of because he threatened and carried a knife. And he was put straight into the other. The parents are up in arms because they weren't told, and I think they should have been told, if that sort of violent character is in the school.
So how do you feel about the fact that in the UK, for some reason, our soft-touch policies allowed this man into the country to murder your son?
Soft-touch policies is right. We welcomed him in with open arms without even phoning any of those countries that he was refused entry and saying, why?
So no checks?
No checks at all. The unbelievable thing is, my wife is Filipino, and she said she had more checks done on her when she came into the country with immigration. And I've had more checks done on me when I joined a gym. But he had no checks at all, absolutely none. And even though the various people were warned, his foster parent and the immigration side of it were warned that he's a dangerous character, he actually posted WhatsApp pictures of him beating someone up. And with that sort of behaviour, and it was known to the police, he should have been asked the question, or he shouldn't have even been allowed in the schools. He should have been in prison.
He should have been in prison. This is a national scandal. That interview should have been leading the mainstream media. They ignored it. The investigative journalist Stephen Edgington said there are staff in the Home Office who are, quote, disgusted at this stuff and want to quit. They are ashamed these criminals got through and their bosses don't seem to care at all. But yet the top bureaucrat in that department still got a £15,000 to £20,000 bonus payment after the murder, on top of his six-figure salary. And as Edgington pointed out, Sir Matthew Rycroft has been the most senior civil servant in the Home Office since March 2020. Last year, he got a £30,000 bonus. Recently, he wrote to staff, "The last few weeks have shown the Home Office at its best. He is obsessed with DEI, spends time meeting officials about trans rights, and helped write race plans for his department." And what makes me most furious is that when people like me talk about the risk of not stopping the boats, talk about how the invasion of our southern border is a national emergency, something I declared back in 2021, before the murder of Tommy, we're accused of being far right, even though this is the human cost of not doing so.
When you hear people criticise folk who say, look, we have to stop the boats because we have to stop this flow of illegal migrants into the country because so many of them, no one's saying 100%, but so many of them are criminals. And they say, no, you're being heartless, you're lacking compassion. What's your response to that?
I don't think compassion comes into it. It's common sense. And I ask anyone who pleads compassion, if it's your child, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father is in the same situation, you wouldn't think the same. Anything you want, we'll put you in schools or here, there and everywhere. We'll give you a life that you don't have to pay for because you're an asylum seeker. And that's wrong. 9 times out of 10, they'll find out the info after the event, not before the event. Otherwise, someone else is going to die.
So I beg of you today, on behalf of his family, do not forget the name Tommy Roberts. Tommy could be your son, your brother, your boyfriend, your best mate. We are often told not to look back in anger when these crimes are committed by illegals who hate us and shouldn't be here. Candlelight vigils, talk of peace. And we're assured by our politicians that justice must be allowed to take its course before there are proper investigations. But as this case proves, that is bullshit. The globalists and the elite class believe that our attention spans are too short to remember. If they get through the heat of the initial crime, they're banking us all moving on. And then they'll cover for themselves. Just like this coroner has covered for the Home Office by refusing a full inquest into what happened. So remember, they're banking us on moving on. We mustn't. Now it's time for the Uncancelled interview. And it is a great pleasure today to have on the show the editor of the brilliant Conservative Woman, a strident commentator on the issues that really matter in the UK and around the world, and one of our biggest freedom fighters, Kathy Gyngell. And Kathy, it is so great to have you on Outspoken, but I'm very emotional actually about this decision. As you can probably tell, I felt very invested in the murder of Tommy Roberts. I feel like it was a case completely ignored by the mainstream media, and I can't believe this decision. Given everything I outlined, how can the coroner say that there's no case for the Home Office to answer, no systemic failures?
Dan, lovely to be on the show, but this is a horrendous decision by the coroner and reflects everything that's wrong about the total lack of justice in this country anymore. I mean, justice has disappeared. We have a right to righteous anger, but we're not even being allowed that. I thought the father was so dignified and so temperate. I'm not sure in his position I could have managed to be that. but nothing is being forgiven to people who have that righteous anger. And by golly, that is what's needed, and it needs to come from far more people in positions of authority in our society. I am totally distressed by their silence about the repression of things that they find awkward, because they refuse to row back on diversity. They refuse to row back on their dreadful, extreme immigration policies that nobody voted for. They refuse to row back. So, as you say, their method of silencing is to ignore and deny and move on. Nothing to see there. The only place there's something to see there is if an asylum boat sinks, or there's a potential drowning.
Yes, and then it's the biggest tragedy. Then it's the biggest tragedy, but the death of a Brit is ignored.
The death of a Brit, and what was appalling in that story is so many people put at risk. Mm-hmm. And for so long, the foster parents, the children at school, this boy lied. I remember a lot of us making a huge amount of fuss when it became apparent that the asylum seeker young men were lying about their age and there was no check. This is an extraordinary story. And it took the dentist to actually report that his dental thing suggested, this is what I read about the case, that he could not possibly be 14.
Yes.
I mean, what are we coming to? I mean, I would not wish a murder on anybody. Obviously, I'm not. But what is the detachment or the lack of empathy from people like Yvette Cooper, from people like Keir Starmer, to the children, the parents? They come out with the sort of right words. Oh, our condolences go to, we feel for. Then they move on within minutes. Keir Starmer has a lectern. As Laura Perrin said to me in an email, the savagely, brutally stabbed and murdered Southport children, they didn't get a lectern. They're nearly forgotten already. We are being absolutely, I don't know whether gaslit's the term, or
I think it is. I think that is the term, because
brainwashed into accepting that this is normal and nobody's to blame.
Yeah, and we're always told, aren't we, Kathy, that eventually it will be okay. If you're not angry at the moment, it will be okay. We'll get it sorted. Once this guy's gone to jail, there'll be a proper inquiry. Then things will change. But look at what happens. They don't. These people cover for each other.
I mean, I think that there was a very interesting article by Professor Gary Sidley, where he's uncovered this thing about an absolute strategy of the government after the Conservatives got in, called controlled spontaneity. And this was meant to people to do all the sort of type of woke thing after any terrible murder or attack. And in this case, it became very apparent with the 2017 London Bridge stabbings and terrorist murder, is that you take all attention off the perps. We're all meant to tell each other we love each other. We're all meant to, give all our sympathy. We're all meant to do that. The one thing we are not allowed to do is actually say who did it, why, and when are they going to be brought to justice, and how are we going to stop this ever happening again. We're not allowed to be honest.
Totally. And I think it is just worth pointing out to everyone as well, this was a complete chance attack on Tommy. So he had no relationship with this guy. He hadn't done anything to provoke it, Kathy. He was literally on a night out in Bournemouth. And this monster, this Afghani terrorist, was out to kill. And unfortunately, Tommy was the unlucky one, but it could have been any of us. And that is what is so terrifying when we are importing these people.
Yes.
And doing nothing.
He's not the only one. I mean, there was the case, the Hartlepool case. Mm-hmm. That was pretty, well, it's appalling. It's unbelievable. To one of them, the asylum seeker killed the other one in the hospital because he'd converted to Christianity. I mean, everybody's forgotten about that one too. It was only a year or so ago, I think. It is this awful moving on. And without the newspapers, as you say, making this absolutely the front page story and holding that. In the past, if we had a terrible murder, that story would hold on the front pages for several days.
Well, absolutely. And there is two-tier justice. And actually, I want to show you a video that Jim Davidson has made about another appalling example of this. Now, it didn't lead to a murder, but Kathy, I'm still so shocked that a man called Mohammed Hassan was at a petrol station, clearly a devout Muslim man. He saw 3 Asian women dressed in Western clothing and literally physically assaulted them. And not only has this
I'll let you decide. Mohammed Hassan,
London boy,
beautiful British name. He
shouldn't make any difference.
It shouldn't. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And this is the thing. So 3 women, Asian women, who were wearing makeup and not wearing traditional dress. He called them prostitutes. He punched and pushed 2 of them, and smacked one of the other woman's head against a car. Now, if you got jailed for 2 years for a social media post, how long do you think his sentence was?
Well, I think that is aggravated assault. It is grievous bodily harm, actual bodily harm, wounding with intent. Mm-hmm. Community service for him because he's Asian?
Community service.
No, you're joking.
Genuinely.
Two Tier Keir. You should be ashamed of yourself, Prime Minister. Get this sorted. That's why people are starting to hate you. People are starting to hate you.
Yesterday.
And you saw, Kathy, the genuine shock on Jim's face.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think there's another thing, that the sort of crazy thing about this, in this type of appeasement policy of justice, or that's both appeasement in terms of the sentencing and appeasement in terms of our response to it, the response we're sort of allowed. You know, you're racist, you're far right, if you draw attention to it. Is that actually, if you want, this country is not racist. This country is extraordinarily tolerant, and has been extraordinarily tolerant about very large numbers of immigrants. And tolerance is correct and right. But on the other hand, if you deny certain realities, and if you look as though you're having a 2-tier justice system which protects one group, you are going to invite racism. I mean, you literally are. And is that what they want to do? Then they can come back and say you're racist again. It's hard to know what the motivation really is in this illogic and prejudice. I mean, the prejudice of our authorities and the bias of our authorities.
Indeed. I mean, the thing that I find so depressing as well, Kathy, is that there are so few people within this country who are talking about this and arguing that point. I mean, I read your brilliant newsletter this week at Conservative Woman, where you summed it up brilliantly. But a lot of the time we are having to rely on foreign actors to actually point out the madness, like Peter Sweden, for example, on X, who posted, Britain will begin to release sex offenders early to make more prison cells available. Meanwhile, they are sending people who post offensive words online to long prison sentences, Soviet Britain. And Elon Musk simply replied, wow. And it is a wow moment, Kathy, because I do believe now there are political prisons, because how else can you explain pensioners, housewives, literally being locked up for posts that may have been an artful, Kathy, but were sent in anger and were soon regretted and didn't directly cause any violence, and now being locked up while sex offenders and violent criminals are being released?
No, it's extraordinary. I remember tweeting that day, 2,000 prisoners released on one day, to make way for the however many it is now, 500 or 600 people done for social media offences. I'm trying to work out actually what law they were actually arrested under. I think it must have been the Communications Act of, I can't actually work out quite what law it is. They've been... Was it incitement to violence?
Yes, it's incitement to racial hatred. That's how they get around it. But some of these people, Kathy, had just posted political memes about wanting to stop the boats.
I know, and apologised and deleted very quickly. No, I knew something smelt really wrong the first time he set up that violent disorder unit, and the first arrests began and the first cases did. And I remember tweeting saying, this is like putting people in the stocks. But I didn't realise, and it was worse than putting people in the stocks, it's putting people in the stocks for 2.5 years or 3 years. And I thought he was just, I smelt the public shaming felt very wrong to me. I thought this is something that Britain as a civilized country sort of got over when we stopped putting people in the stocks. And now Starmer was doing it again, but then he sort of doubled down, and it's got even worse. It's like it's Lubyanka, isn't it? It's, we always used to be horrified by the Soviet system, and people would come in the middle of the night and take them off to Lubyanka. Well, the only bit we miss out, it took 3 days between an arrest, a sentence, and being in prison. I mean, arrest, court case, sentence, prison. So, what's the difference? It's more subtle. And of course, this is where the stupid woke middle classes say, oh, well, it's not, it's a judge and it's this right. It went through the court. It has to be all right. No, this is a perversion of justice.
Well, indeed.
And I'm horrified that people like David Davis, Lord Sumption, haven't come out and seen this what it is. It's an attack on the rule of law in this country. And our democracy is based on a rule of law. Where are they? Where are these senior people? I can't believe the remnant Tory MPs. Has anyone Tory MP condemned Starmer for this?
Nope.
I mean, I think Nigel Farage is the only one who's put his head above the parapet on this. Yes. And then, of course, they accuse him of doing the riots. I mean, you can't make it up.
No, indeed. And I want to come to Reform UK in just a moment, actually. But something that has really started to concern me, Kathy, is the pressure that these folk are being put under to plead guilty. They're being remanded in custody, which is absolutely insane, given that is something usually reserved for criminals who pose a clear threat to the public in terms of violence. And so thank goodness, actually, for the new leader of UKIP. He's called Nick Marshall Tenshoni. He's actually going to be on Outspoken next week. And he has been in court today. And it's really, really interesting, actually. He managed to convince one person not to plead guilty, even though they were told that they would be remanded in custody if they did. So watch him explain what's happened. It's really fascinating.
The individual was contacted last night, which is standard operating procedure for a barrister if things aren't going to go the way they want it to go, and said, you're going to be remanded. If it's a not guilty plea, you're going to be remanded. And then we have what happened this morning with the brief as well. You're going to be remanded. This constant, you are going to prison. Now, the defendant has said, I'm not guilty. I'm standing up for what's right. I'm standing against two-tier judiciary. We've gone into court. 6 out of the 7 who have pleaded guilty have been they're being remanded. They're not being sentenced at a later date. They're going straight to prison today. They're on their way to prison right now. The one individual that said, I am not guilty and I'm standing up for myself, he was told he was going to be remanded. He's going to prison. He's been given bail. He's been given bail. And why has he been given bail? I've just been in the courtroom and I've heard the judge. Due to the enormity of cases, due to the pressure, due to the media sensationalism, they are throwing people in prison. The moment you say guilty, you are going to prison. But if you want the CCTV evidence, if you want that assessed, if you want people to know your story, if you want to say no to two-tier judiciary, if you want to stand up to two-tier policing, you have the opportunity to say, I'm not guilty, I'm not going to take your offer, which says, if I plead guilty now, I'll get less time. 6 out of the 7 now are on their way to prison. And this one individual has said, I'm going to stand up to you, no matter what the consequence is, I'm innocent.
Isn't it fascinating, Kathy? And that one individual, by the way, he apparently had been at the migrant centre, but absolutely insists that CCTV will prove that he simply walked in, walked out, wasn't involved in any violent activity, and hopefully he will now be able to clear his name.
Well, what an impressive guy. I mean, thank you, Dan, for alerting me to him. I mean, that particular video needs to be shared um, all over, doesn't it? What it also tells me, this was a terrible attack on the white working class. That's what I felt, that, we had plumbers, we had a Sellafield worker, we had a carer, there's a pensioner. These are poor people. These are not rich people. They're not privileged people. And there was something extraordinarily bullying about the way in which they were treated. Were they given a chance? No legal aid for them. Were they given a chance to have a lawyer who said, hang on a minute, rather like the head of the UKIP party is now saying, hang on a minute, no chance to explain themselves. In court, they were humiliated, they cried, they apologized. That was already terrible public shaming. Sort of, wasn't it enough? No, he's so right. They must not plead guilty if they did not do anything that was actually violent. I mean, there was one guy, and he's been sent down, and he simply had a baton in his hand, a stick in his hand. Okay, he was at a protest, and when they asked him to disperse, he said no, because he's saying this is my right to protest. I mean,
people going down for yelling at the police. I mean, it's extraordinary. And of course, what's so interesting is that there's now a growing school of thought, Kathy, led by, speaking of people who've done brilliant work over this period, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, that actually Starmer may have broken his own law in the way that he incited violence. Now, actually, Toby explains this much better than me. So let's listen to what he had to say, and I'll get you to react off the bat, Kathy.
There was some data about the initial wave of arrests showing that most people arrested were in fact locals, and only a minority from outside the areas where the disorder was happening. So Keir Starmer effectively, whether knowingly or not, has trafficked in misinformation about who is involved in the rioting and who is organising, instigating the rioting. And by saying it's people from outside your area, far-right, anti-Muslim activists from outside your area that are coming in to attack mosques and attack Muslims, that effectively triggered local Muslim populations in those areas to organize counter protests. And during those counter protests, crimes were committed. People identified as far right protesters were hunted down and attacked. The police in some cases were attacked. So you could argue that Keir Starmer himself is guilty of a criminal offence under the Online Safety Act, the criminal offence that he's urging the authorities to prosecute people for. He knowingly trafficked in false information, which definitely caused physical harm.
He's got a point, doesn't he?
It is very amusing, isn't it? I mean, in a way, it sort of reminds me of, if you look back to your French history and the French revolutionary tribunals, in the end, they all turned on each other using the laws they had introduced under the French Revolution. I mean, yet we haven't yet to see that Labour people turning on Starmer or killing each other, not killing each other, but attacking each other in that way. But of course, he's absolutely right. Any type of misinformation accusation, it can so easily be based on misinformation itself that it just sort of goes around in a complete circle, and it's a complete waste of time. I mean, the Crown prosecution, the idea that anyone can be sort of found out for this in a way.
Indeed. It's very disturbing.
But whether he'll be held up for that, I mean, it would be very nice.
Won't.
But you can't, who would be the lawyer? Who'd be the head of the Crown Prosecution Service isn't going to go for him, is he?
No, but there's loads of people like it, Kathy, just like Nick Lowles, who runs the ironically titled charity Hope Not Hate, which is actually one of the most hateful organisations in the country. Yeah. His disinformation, I mean, I actually hate that word, but I'll just say his lie, right? His point blank lie, which was that Muslim women were being acid attacked, did actually lead to violence. He hasn't even been arrested.
No.
And I don't think he should be, but if people on the other side are...
But he has a special relationship with the police, doesn't he? I mean, if
and
you
the
look at
Labour
what
Party.
they do, and he shows off about it, it's a vigilante group. They are vigilantes. You could say it's sort of like a Ku Klux Klan, and ironically, I'll probably be done for defamation, but it actually sets out to hunt people down, hope not hate, to track people, and to then expose them to police and dob them into the police. And in I think on the website that I looked at recently, he shows off about their success in doing this. Now, what justice are those people going to get? Let's hope they don't plead guilty. There's something very wrong about the relationship of that. It should never be a charity because it's a politically activist group, and it's very left in its origins and in its support. It's absolutely appalling that it has charitable status.
It really is. It really is. But of course, that's not going to change under the Labour government because they have literally been invited into Westminster in recent weeks. But look, breaking right now, the mainstream media and the political class are launching a war on Reform UK. Nigel Farage's party, they say, now poses a danger. And what you're going to see happening more and more now are despicable attacks, not just on Reform UK, not just on their leadership, but on their voters as well, who they are going to degrade, who they are going to put down. For example, in the Times today, one Labour MP described Reform members as keyboard warriors. Quote, many of these are in their Transformers pyjamas in their mum's basement, but what we haven't yet is seen Reform on the doorstep or speaking to voters. So it's begun, Kathy, and you have predicted this, writing on X. Wait for the demonising, labelling and smearing of Reform UK and Farage to begin, with a delighted BBC ready to report each and every attack as fact. So it's begun. The attack on Reform UK has begun.
It brings back the fruitcakes and loonies. What was the David Cameron thing? It's a smear.
Yeah, and Hillary Clinton's basket of deplorables speaking about Trump supporters.
Deplorables. I mean, I think the terrible thing is, again, with the sort of it is how these epithets are become very effective brands of sort of demonization and tarring. And we have got to call them out every minute because they do stick. And they get repeated, of course, by the mainstream media, by the corporatist mainstream media that fundamentally supports the uniparty narrative and doesn't challenge any of this. So, it's up to us. I don't know what else we do except for keep calling it out and show them up for the prejudiced, biased, hateful people that they are to be tarring and labelling other people.
And they just don't get it, do they? Because this MP has also described the fact that there's been little scrutiny of, quote, how absolutely loopy Reform UK policies are. What's loopy about wanting to maintain your borders, about wanting to stop the boats? Actually, I think it's the opposite of loopy, is it not?
Well, I mean, Nigel Farage's speech at after the election, when he gave a speech at the NEC. Oh, no, it's just before the election. He gave a wonderful sort of, not a magnum opus, but it was a sort of Herculean speech without a note, where he went through all of Reform's policies. It really was a magnificent speech at the end of his electioneering. And there was one policy after another, and I was just going, cheer, cheer, tick, tick, cheer, cheer, tick, tick. I mean, through from, there was nothing loopy about them at all. They were the type of common sense, socially conservative policies, because people are basically socially conservative, sensible policies that everybody wanted, that the Conservative should have been on any Conservative manifesto for years and haven't been. But I think this might backfire on Labour.
Well, this is a movement that they are terrified of. And for good reason, by the way. I mean, you see the collapse of the other mainstream political parties, Kathy. Quite the opposite is happening with Reform UK. Its membership has swelled to 76,000. They've added 10,000 since the election, 25,000 in the 4 weeks of the campaign. I mean, this is now a real force which is gathering momentum, quite the opposite of every other major political party in the country, including, by the way, Labour and the SNP, which are completely cratering when it comes to their membership and when it comes to their movement. And to describe Reform UK MPs and policies as loopy, and to describe Reform UK members and voters as being keyboard warriors sitting in their mum's basement, they just don't get it. And what they are doing is showing their absolute snobbery when it comes to the real heroes, I think, of this country. But look, I want to show you Rupert Lowe, who is, I think, a really great guy, Reform UK's Great Yarmouth MP. This is a very successful businessman. He is donating his entire MP salary to a charity every single week. And you can't look at this man making this point and tell me he's loopy.
But what I do know is that when I sit in Parliament, it doesn't function properly. It is not working. It's a duopoly. It is a two-party state. It's almost as if, Tories go to Labour. Well, it's your turn to have a play with the train set now, and then it'll be handed back to the Tories. Well, that is not going to do the country any good. We need some disruptors, and we're disruptors, but we are reflecting what the majority of people in the country want. And I object to the media who basically say we're a sort of an upstart. No, we're not. We got 4.1 million votes, and next time we're going to get a hell of a lot more.
And actually, what's so interesting about that, Kathy, is he's saying exactly the same thing as Michael Sheen, the actor, the hard left actor, who I actually completely disagree with about everything politically, but I played him on the show yesterday because he was making a very similar point that actually, I think the uni party has to be broken, and they are fighting against what is the inevitable here, which is there has to be a complete revolution of the UK political system because the majority is not being represented.
No, the Labour, like the Tories, are in complete denial about their out of touchness with ordinary people and with the mainstream view. What I found interesting with the election with Reform is how many seats it came second in to Labour, where Labour won and it beat Conservatives. I mean, we had one of our writers, Paddy Benham-Crosswell, and he was down doing Swansea West. He began with himself and his partner doing the canvassing. At the end of the first week, he got 20 local volunteers, and he ended up with an extraordinary number of votes, coming second, with no, and Farage had acknowledged it with the other newest, latest Reform MP, that there wasn't a party machine in action to help them. Paddy did that against this chap called Torquil something, can't make it up, double barrel name, PPE, Oxford, whatever, I'm not sure whether that's exactly right, but you get the gist, who'd been catapulted into that seat by the Labour Party, who had the entire machine working for him. And that is the power of Reform, and that is a reflection of the need for the party.
Do you believe, Kathy, that Nigel Farage can be Prime Minister in 2029? Let's
believe it. Yes, I think we must. So my late husband always used to say, if you want something, visualize it. Mm-hmm. And so we'd be driving along and he'd say, oh God, where are we going to find? I'd say, where are we going to find a parking space? We should have got a taxi. We shouldn't have come in the car. And he'd say, oh, I'm just visualizing the parking space, Kathy. And boom, up came the parking space. I'm visualizing Nigel as being the next Prime Minister, because the more you visualize it, the more it seems absolutely likely and possible.
I think we have to believe. And I think if you look at what's happening across Europe, Meloni in Italy, I think Le Pen will end up being president of France at the next presidential election. I think there is this sweeping of populism for very, very good reason. I don't view it as a scary thing. And I do think it's possible, because what actually gives me the most practical hope is that Nigel only had 4 weeks to campaign before the last general election. And it was actually not the seats they won that I was most excited about, Kathy. They were maybe a little bit more predictable. It was the seats in which Reform came a pretty close second to Labour. against all odds. You know, these were largely red wall seats. I think there was something like 90 of them actually where they came second to Labour. And I think after 5 years of this absolute misery, and let's be honest, this isn't things can only get better. This isn't Blair style. I mean, this is honestly misery from day one. And I do believe it. What do you think Farage has to do, though? Because, you know, he is someone who is hugely charismatic. He's our version of Donald Trump without any doubt. But is he focused enough? Is this something that he is committed to? Because it's going to be an all-encompassing project, isn't it, for him to turn this party into a party of government, especially when we see those forces in the mainstream media and the elite class completely against reform.
He's going to have to be terribly strong and get all the energy again that he used over his sort of how many year fight to get the vote
Brexit.
on Brexit, and he has to go beyond obviously being an immigration party, though immigration obviously is a really key issue economically, culturally, it's obviously up at the top. His big problem is that his biggest enemy is the mainstream media. They will not support him. It's extraordinary, their snobbery. They don't understand that he's actually the most talented politician that we have and has had several years. No other politician can speak like this. No other politician has got a command of his brief like him. I defy any other politician in Britain today to stand up and be able to talk on the hoof without a note like he does on anything. I've been to things where he's opened himself up to audience questions. He can answer anything. He is very in command, and he is not given due sort of like respect for that by the mainstream media at all. And of course, by the BBC have just pilloried him and treated him and demonized him over, since 1997 or whenever the first European elections he was fighting. So the problem isn't in him. It is a problem how to get over this enormous institutional bias against him. But I would perhaps one thing I'd like to see, but it's step by step, some really key expert advisors around him, so to perhaps up his game a little bit. And I can't think or name who these people were. I'm not going to say it, but really people whose credentials and whose authority and whose knowledge is you can't argue with. I'd like to see a small group of those sort of people around him, and it wouldn't be the first time it happened. I'm old enough to remember Harold Wilson becoming prime minister, and he wasn't a good prime minister, and it was all a disaster, Labour again. But he was clever in that he got top Cambridge and Oxbridge academics around him, and everyone. It sort of, put him on the front foot.
Yeah, I agree. Look, the thing is, I worked with Nigel, obviously, for, how many years? 3 years at GB News. He is an absolutely brilliant man, but he is someone who tends to only trust his own judgment, and he loves surrounding himself, Kathy, and I like this to an extent, but by very talented youngsters, so that he is always calling the shots. But I do agree with you. I think he needs to build a proper political operation around him and give himself that support and give the party that support. I also think what we need to see are some brave Conservatives start to defect. Suella Braverman, the Tory party is not your home anymore. I mean, I call her Superwoman Suella, right? I love her. I'm a big fan. But you've got no home in the Conservatives anymore. They don't believe in you.
Some of them don't get it still, though. They
don't.
I just even wonder whether they should be going there. Robert Jenrick's an obvious one. He doesn't have a place in that party. It is a woke party. Even Priti Patel didn't get half of it. Kemi Badenoch doesn't get half of it. They're all too careful and cautious. They always are looking at what the left's doing first. They don't. 100%. I don't know whether they know what their conservative principles are any longer. I think Robert Jenrick is the only one. At least he resigned as immigration minister, and then became very outspoken himself. But
I mean, I think he's actually got it in the bag. What I find so funny, Kathy, is just how out of touch the mainstream media is with the actual members of the Conservative Party. I mean, I'm a big supporter of the Conservative Democratic Organisation, which was all about returning democracy to the party. Well, the party machinery actually fights so strongly against that because they know they're never going to elect a Tom Tugendhat, a James Cleverly, even a Kemi Badenoch, who is completely controlled by the sort of mainstream of the conservative, big C conservative movement. So I think Robert Jenrick has got this in the bag. But what's going to be critical then is how does he deal with reform? How does he deal with Farage? Because the only way that I think the party can be saved is some sort of arrangement between the two.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And you think... And I don't know, it's very, the Conservative Party, I still say it, the Conservative Party deserved to die, and it pretty much has died. I mean, I couldn't get interested in this leadership election.
No, I'm with you. It's irrelevant.
Lesser and lesser. The Tory leader, if you go through every year, it just sort of, one thing about Tories from Thatcher onwards, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse and worse.
Yes. Well, look, seeing you've mentioned Thatcher, I actually want to talk about her in just one moment, and Angela Rayner, who somehow has managed to turn questions about her raving in Ibiza into an issue of class and gender, as she always does. Identity politics. So don't go anywhere. Kathy Gyngell back in just 1 minute. Don't you go anywhere either, because I have to tell you that the great thing about being independent now is I only tell you about products that I use and truly believe in and think can improve your life like they have mine. So let me talk to you about Verso. As you probably know by now, I've entered my 40s thinking about staying healthy. And one of the ways I did that actually was looking for ways that I could be fit and sharp, but also, I guess, find out how scientific evidence can help reverse the aging process with interventions. And so scientists like David Sinclair have done that. So I was looking for a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, also backed up by solid evidence. This product is called Cell Being by Verso. It has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels. I hadn't heard of them, but it's so important because it is the stuff that powers every single cell in your body. Wow, it's made a difference to me. I've been using this product every morning for months now. It's been genuinely transformative. My fasting is easier. I've lost fat. I've lost weight. The team at Verso tell me it's due to its blood sugar regulating effects, which lead to fewer cravings. I'm sleeping better. I wake up with more energy. I even feel happier too. So this has taken years off my life. I'd love you to experience the same thing. Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced to guarantee that you're getting what you pay for. And I'm very excited to say that to March our launch, Verso is giving you an amazing offer. So if you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you'll save 15% on your first order. All you need to do is use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. The link is in our show notes on YouTube and Rumble. But to repeat, bui.ver.so/outspoken, use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. But now back to the show. And Angela Rayner has, of course, managed to turn the criticism of her ridiculous raving in Ibiza, which I thought was embarrassing and unbecoming for the Deputy Prime Minister. She's managed to turn it into an issue of gender and class, and let's be honest, identity politics, because that's where she always goes. Now, before I show you this bizarre interview with Kay Burley on Sly News, can I just remind you that Angela Rayner was the one who constantly used to criticise Boris Johnson anytime he went on holiday. So just be thinking of that when you watch her answers here on Sly News this morning.
What did you make of all this fuss about that video in Ibiza?
Well, I was on holiday for a couple of days. I mean, you can criticise me dancing, it is subjective, but...
Honestly, so what? You were out in a club having a relaxing time.
I mean,
good on you, but
I mean, I take my job really seriously and what I do, and I work, and I'm always in Parliament, and I'm always doing what needs to be done, and I'll continue to that. But I also believe, as a former trade
what time of the night was this? I mean, how did you keep? I would have been in bed by that time.
Oh, Fisher's a really, really great guy. I've known Fisher for a number of years, and I just think you've got to have downtime as well. Everybody has to have downtime, but I do take my job really seriously, and I like to talk about what I'm doing to help other people.
I'm not criticising you. I just wondered what you thought about the uproar.
At times, people like to look at that element, or yes, I'm working class. I like a dance. I like dance music. I got criticised for going to the opera, if you remember. I wasn't allowed. I was a champagne socialist for going to the theatre.
I think it's harder being a woman in politics than a man.
I think we get judged very much. I mean, the day I walked into number 10, which was an incredible day for someone.
Do you think you'd ever say that?
No. But for someone from my background, and for me to walk down that famous street and to go into number 10 was an incredible moment. There was just so much more commentary on what I was wearing. And I was like, I've spent years, I came off my council estate, I've worked really, really hard. I brought my child up when I was 16, and I've worked my way to be respected, to get to this position, to show that I've got worth in what I'm doing. And you're talking about what dress I'm wearing or what jacket I'm wearing. It's like, I'm trying to do a job for people here, and that, I think, distracts sometimes. And it's frustrating because it's like, well, let's talk about the substance.
But as Chris Rose posted on X, nobody is criticising Angela for her background, it's her hypocrisy. She previously criticised others, such as Boris, for going on holiday. Kay Burley chose a friendly chat instead of scrutinising, and it is interesting seeing her try to take the higher ground, isn't it, morally, Kathy, given this is the woman that believes that all Conservatives are scum, for example.
Well, yeah, I mean, she's not exactly dignified, is she? She obviously has no self-awareness at all, because she must realise that most people would find that sort of like, it really, as you said, embarrassing. This is what is she, the Deputy Prime Minister? No, well, she's not actually even trying to act the part, is she? Whatever she says, she's obviously an attention seeker. She's verbally incontinent, She's very privileged to have been made Deputy Prime Minister with all those sort of things against her. But, what do you expect from Kay Burley? A pillar of the woke establishment, corporate me, politically correct media that doesn't hold anybody that should be held to account, but will push victim agendas. I mean, what really Angela Rayner needs to remember is she's by far from the first woman Labour MP from a working class background to get in the cabinet, and I don't suppose she even knows, does she ever bother to find anything out? Margaret Bomfield, 1923, one of 3 Labour MPs to get into government that year, was the first Labour woman MP in the cabinet. And if Angela Rayner wants to know about poverty and a hard upbringing, well, she was the 10th of 11 children of an unemployed working man who began working herself at the age of 13. I don't think she had a right to buy. I don't think there are even any council houses there for her family to go into. So basically, Angela, put that in your pipe and smoke it.
It's very good point.
Blinking victim.
Very good point. And the thing that infuriates me, and I mean, I absolutely loved your description just then, Kathy, of Burley, because utterly perfect. But what infuriates me is this is the same mainstream media that you'll remember just a few weeks ago were literally chasing Nigel Farage around the hallways of the RNC when he went at a weekend to support Donald Trump just days after his assassination attempt. And do you remember Channel 4 News, Emily Maitlis literally chasing him around? How dare you not be in Clacton? So the hypocrisy is off the scale. Yeah, I find her dancing embarrassing. I completely agree. She's not even trying to be a dignified Deputy Prime Minister. She's playing to her base potentially, but cringe. But the bigger point is, how on earth can that be completely fine, but it's not fine for Nigel Farage to attend the biggest gathering of the Republican Party once every 4 years?
Yeah. And a man who always behaves well, dresses properly, is very respectful to people, has manners. All those things I would suggest Angela Rayner is a little bit short on. She's done very much to encourage people to look at her legs or her. I can't remember whether she's done a cleavage or not. I sort of get fed up. But yes, it's a very strange type of woke leftist progressive prejudice, isn't it?
It is.
The left, the me people, the woke, the people who say the right things can do no wrong. Any dissenter is always going to be got at and hounded and targeted. And really sadly, we know now, and Keir Starmer's just institutionalized it in the police and the justice system, that's the society we live in now. It's not the Britain anyone can be very proud of.
And of course, this is from the same party that removed, in my opinion, the ultimate conservative woman, other than you, Kathy, Margaret Thatcher. And I was very entertained by your posts on this. You wrote, the removal of Margaret Thatcher's portrait from number 10 by Sir Keir Starmer demonstrates how in the pocket of extremists our PM is. Who did he do that for? And you went on, I expect she made him feel very small looking down on him, which he is, with all the insecurity typical of bullies and authoritarians. And it was an astonishing first move symbolically, wasn't it, for Starmer to do that?
I mean, what is extraordinary, and it's even, I still sort of I do see Tony Blair as the person who started all this sort of descent into this anti-democratic descent. But still, even the contrast with Gordon Brown commissioned that portrait. Every other prime minister's had it sitting there. She won an important war for the country. She got the country back on its feet. It's the meanness. Do you remember when Tony Blair got in? No, what happened when they all said the witch is dead, the witch is dead? It feels to me part of that very childish Thatcher hate type of culture that I suppose Starmer grew up in, really. I can't quite remember how old Starmer is, but that it was fashionable to hate Thatcher. And although Thatcher had been the one person who brought this country back into some sort of order and sanity and economic prosperity.
I mean, and he's completely part of that generation. He's 62, I think, so he absolutely is. But I think it's bigger than that, Kathy, because in my opinion, this is the proof that actually Starmer is on the hard left. And actually, because of lunatics like Owen Jones consistently saying for the past 4 years, oh, Starmer's some sort of right-wing, centrist. No. Actually, this is a highly ideological man. He was just very, very good at hiding his ideology from the public in order to become prime minister.
But it actually also shows how very authoritarian the hard left is. That there is nothing democratic about them, and that they don't even pretend to represent the working man. They are elitists. I knew that they're hard left in the sense of being, well, they're sort of national socialists, but they're not national. They're WEF.
WEF, yeah.
How do we?
I mean, look, this is maybe not a category, but I describe it as globalist woke tyranny. And there's also some real shades of communism coming in as well. So I find it frankly terrifying. And I warned that Starmer wasn't this centrist, cozy figure. But, sometimes it takes someone like this being in power for there to be a course correction. And I think there will be a course correction, but my God, it's going to be a tough 5 years before then, which is why we have to support the independent media. For people who don't know about Conservative Woman, Kathy, can you just explain where people can find it?
Right. Conservative Woman's actually our URL. So you can, by doing www.conservativewoman I can never do it, co.uk. You can find us very quickly on Google. But in fact, on our website, we did rebrand ourselves as TCW, the Conservative Woman Defending Freedom, because I think it was during even before lockdown, we were so horrified by Boris Johnson and his various shenanigans. We didn't want any association with the Conservative Party at all. It is a little bit difficult because the brand Conservative Woman stuck. We believe we are small c Conservative women. We have plenty of men writing for us. We have a big male readership. But what we stand for is freedom and small c conservatism, the genuine sort, not the in-name only party sort.
Well, you a must read for me. And of course, I believe now one of our only ways out of this thing is to support a thriving independent media. So I'm so delighted that you have come on Outspoken today. The wonderful Kathy Gyngell, editor of The Conservative Woman. Thank you so much, Kathy.
Thank you, Dan, very much indeed. Thank you.
Speak soon. But look, don't go anywhere, because coming up in the Uncancelled After Show today, royal YouTube sensation Plead on the latest news out of Montecito that Prince Harry is demanding an apology from his brother Prince William before he returns to royal duties. How delusional is this Duke? You know, it's very important to me that we have a safe space not patrolled by big tech, where censorship and control runs deep. So that's why we have launched www.outspoken.live. You get half an hour of extra content every single day. So please head there, register, and then you can watch live our conversation with Plead. At this stage, we come off YouTube and Rumble. We move to that platform. And remember, we are back every weekday at 5 p.m. UK time, midday Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Hit subscribe right now on YouTube and Rumble. And most importantly, I promise to keep fighting for you. We'll see you on the after show with Plead in just 1 minute.